we have a great presentation for you all today, so I'm just going to do a quick housekeeping item that everyone has been muted. If you do want to talk, need to talk, you press *6 to unmute yourself and then *6 again to remute. So I will pass it over to the presenters to get us started.
Thanks, Sammy. So that would be me. My name's Jim Lesko. I'm Director of the Technical Assistance for the Preschool Development Grant TA Project, and I'm with Atlas. And it is my pleasure to get us started this afternoon. This is the first of a series of 4 webinar / communities of conversation that we'll be having on behalf of the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 TA project. And our first conversation today, focused on data, will be specifically on the topic of data governance. And it will be my pleasure to introduce Tony Ruggeri. He is a TA specialist with the AEM Corporation, and Tiffany Boyd, who is also a TA specialist with the AEM Corporation, and working with us today as a part of the PDG Birth to 5 TA effort. So today, as I mentioned, it will be a part of the 4-part communities of conversation. We welcome all of the PDG grantees and their partners. And we know that many of the PDG grantees have also included their consultants who have been assisting them with their data efforts. So welcome to everybody. I'm also happy to have our PDG B-5 TA team on board and briefly call them out. Sammy Couture, Kesley Shaw, Maria Sinodi, Evelyn Keating, Chris Botsko, Sue Mitchell, and Gauri Gladish, and each of them are on the line this afternoon. We wanted to remind folks that these communities of conversation are voluntary, but yet we are very glad for those of you who have joined us, especially given a Friday afternoon. And of course, depending on what part of the country you're in at the moment, also quite steamy wherever you happen to be. Our communities of conversation that we'll be having across and through September will focus on a variety of topics, today being our first on the data communication. We do want to remind you that if you do have a particular question that you would like to ask either of the presenters or some of the your state colleagues who will also be sharing on the call today, there is a chat box as a part of your Adobe window. We encourage you to put that information into your chat box, and we have a capable team of people monitoring the chat box, and we'll make sure that we call out your particular question. I do want to remind everybody that we are also recording the webinar today, and we will be posting the recording on the PDG TA page as a part of the Office of Child Care Technical Assistance website. So today, we'll have a conversation around data governance. We'll have an opportunity for participant questions and discussion. Again, remind you, put them into the chat box. We have the fortunate opportunity that Tony and Tiffany have arranged for several PDG grantees to share some of their experiences around data governance. And we'll be giving them an opportunity to join the conversation over the next hour. Tiffany and Tony will be talking about best practices, and then we'll have some reminders at the close of the conversation today. So I'm going to turn this over to Tony and Tiffany. If you both would like to do an introduction or you're ready to go, it's on you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. This is Tony Ruggiero, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So to start us off, we have a question for you, and that is, what do you think of when you hear the phrase or these words, data governance? Please take a moment and enter one or two words into the chat box that come to mind when you think of data governance. I'll see data sharing agreements, privacy, security, collaboration, coordination, common understanding and permissions for use of data shared across organizations, teams, and policies. Outstanding. And data governance encompasses all of that. And all great answers, everyone, and thank you for responding. And so we know that data governance, and as you're writing into the chat, can help answer many questions. It can help us to keep organized and structured and have a way of operating in a routine fashion, and also a way for everyone to understand exactly what we need to do. So questions such as who is responsible for providing data definitions for the data sets that we oversee. Questions such as what do we do when someone who has been here for a while leaves? What does our current staff do? And then also, what is the new person supposed to do? How do they then come in and pick up where that person is left off? Data governance also helps us to answer or consider sharing our data with our partner organizations. How do we do this? What is the method? What kind of privacy do we need? What kind of privacy controls do we need to have in place in order to work on our integrated efforts? What do we do when there appears to be the same version of a report? This report, these two different versions may be using the same exact data, but there could be calculations that are different, and these reports are meant for something entirely different, and truly they do not overlap. So how do we determine which reports we should be using? And then also data governance can help us to identify how do we fulfill a request or a data request that comes from the governor's office or that comes from the public in terms of questions they would like to have answered with the data that we have. So data governance can help us answer all these questions as we move on our integrated data effort. The definition of data governance, as you see here, comes from the State Longitudinal Data System Program. Data governance, it's two things. It's an organizational process, and it's also a structure. And data governance establishes responsibility for data. Again, you're going to see everything that you just put in the chat, and that is good. We're all on the same page here. It helps to organize staff across partner organizations to work collaboratively. And it also helps us to work on improvement or improving data quality efforts through the creation or the systematic creation of policies, roles, responsibilities, and procedures. And also want to note here that data governance exists in two ways. It can be formal, or it can be informal. And this is important to note. And Tiffany will talk about this in a few moments. There are central principles of data governance. They include having an agency-wide approach to manage information all the way from collecting high-quality data through using our data to answer program and policy questions, ensuring that all programs or partners involved in this effort are represented, they're at the table, making sure that each data element or data system has an identified owner. That is, we know where the data is coming from, we know who oversees it, we know the databases, and we know the offices that are responsible for the data. It helps to establish common processes, definitions, and business rules. So you can see business rules here on the end of data quality, ensuring that the business rules or edit checks exist in our data systems as data is coming in. And it's important to note that data governance is not an IT initiative. This is something that needs to be owned by all the programs who are contributing to the effort. And because the data is a reflection, or should be a reflection, of what is happening in the program. It also helps to identify clear and distinct roles and relationships among the many parties that are involved. And also, it is important to note that in order to keep organization and everything very transparent, to have somebody who is responsible for organizing everybody and bringing people together. So having one person or contact or point of contact, such as a coordinator that oversees the data governance activities. And then also data governance can help support efforts as it comes to those interagency agreements, and also helping to establish the collaboration that is needed as we work on our integrated data work. So with that, we are going to turn it over to our panelists, and we're going to, I will call them by state, and they will introduce themselves, and then we'll have a few questions for them, and we'll go in order for them to answer questions. So Georgia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Just want to remind the state partners that are going to join the conversation that you have to hit *6 in order for us to hear you.
Hi, this is Bentley Ponder. Thank you for that reminder. Yes, I am the Deputy Commissioner for Quality Innovations at Partnerships at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, and one of the projects underneath my division is our cross-agency child-level data system.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bentley. And Jesse?
I wasn't able to join us today, so it's just me representing Georgia.
Thank you, Bentley. Pennsylvania.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Hackelman from Pennsylvania in our Office of Child Development and Early Learning. And I work with many great members of our office team regarding our early childhood data and specifically helping with a lot of our data reporting and data sharing across our internal and external partners.
Great, thank you, Emily. And Maryland.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is Rachel Dema. I'm the Director of the Preschool Development Grant Birth Through 5 work here at the Maryland State Department of Education. And within that project scope, we have our Data Modernization Initiative, which I'll talk more about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. So to start, we'll have Bentley go first, and our questions are, how did data governance get started in your state, and who is responsible now? And what has been the role of data governance for the integrated early childhood data?
For us in Georgia, and I'm really going to speak about our cactus system that I mentioned just a second ago. There's other data governance things that we've done, but I think that, for the purposes of this call, I'll focus on that. So our cactus system was actually created as a result of our Early Learning Challenge grant, but a lot of the work for that had begun before that grant. So I would say for us, data governance really started in between, the years of 2010 and 2013. We were very lucky because Georgia was a P20 race to the top state, and so they had created what's called Georgia Awards, which is a longitudinal research data system related to race to the top. So we were able to take their governance structure that they had for that and then apply it to Cactus. In terms of our model, Cactus brings together stakeholders from my department, the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, also the Georgia Department of Public Health, Georgia Division for Family and Child Services, the Georgia Department of Education, and then we're also fortunate that we have all of our Head Start grantees as part of Cactus. The infrastructure, and I would say too that in terms of our infrastructure, we're much further ahead in terms of the technology than we are in the policy. So while I think we've made strides in data governance, I think that we still have a little bit of ways to go. But internally, all of the technology piece is housed at DECAL, and then the governance is spread across the different the different data contributors. We call them participating data contributors, and those are the departments I just mentioned, and then also Head Start. In terms of what it does is our data governance is essentially the framework for all the decision making around Cactus, and this way no decision is made by any one stakeholder alone, and it helps everyone feel ownership of the project. We've been working on a data governance structure for a while. We're in the final stages of developing a policy manual, and that will really lay that out, and I think we're about 85% done with that.
Well, thank you, Bentley. A lot of excellent work happening there in your state. Thank you for sharing. Emily?
Hi. So for Pennsylvania, we certainly have also similarly had a system that we've had in place since the probably 2007 to 10 was when a lot of the work was really being developed. And in that structure, it really allowed us to start making connections of data across our early childhood programs as well. When we did that, however, it did require us to really stretch our thoughts around data governance and really thinking about data sharing agreements as we were crossing different programs that were funded in different ways. So we were taking Department of Human Service funded programs and Department of Education funded programs and linking that data together. So that allowed us to take advantage of those resources over the years to start making those connections, creating data agreements, and allowing us to establish sort of that longitudinal look for what's happening for children across their experiences from early childhood care into the school system.
Great, thank you, Emily. Rachel?
Sure. So to echo Bentley and Emily, Maryland also has a long history of progressing in their strategic management of early childhood data integration, and there have been a number of key turning points along the way. One of those was when Maryland was awarded a first-round Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Fund grant in 2011, and that just built on a long background of that kind of work in the state. However, to focus on what we're currently pursuing in terms of our data integration strategy, I can provide a quick interview of some of the key functions that we're thinking about that speak to many of the principles of data governance that you just mentioned. And so our data modernization initiative, which is really focused on supporting our collaborative mixed delivery system for programs and services that touch all children birth through 5 in the state and their families. Here in the Division of Early Childhood, the role of data governance has really centered around 5 key areas, which I'll just run through really quickly. The first is data quality and integrity. So we just talked about that, ensuring the accuracy of data, and this is particularly important as we move as a state to assigning unique identifiers for children across the various programs in which they might be participating from birth until school entry and then with moving into school. Efficiencies, so increasing efficiencies in terms of data entry and data access and use, and trying to reduce the number of steps and redundancies and around all of the business processes that involve our data. The third area is around data sharing, which is really focused on collaboration and coordination with partners and stakeholders, which I'll talk more about. And the fourth area is improving customer service and client experience, and we really think of that in terms of both internal and external use, so how our staff and agencies are experiencing our data systems, but then also how our ultimate clients and consumers, families and children themselves are experiencing them. And then the fifth area is communications and reporting, which is providing database, a database narrative really to stakeholders and the public. And just to mention that all of that work is housed within the Division of Early Childhood, and that has a number of different branches that encompass our child care subsidy program, what we call our child care scholarship program, our quality rating and improvement system, which is Maryland Excels. We have a program coordination and improvement branch. We have a branch focused on what we call early learning, which is where we house our kindergarten readiness assessment and all of the work that speaks to those processes and data in the state. So we also have our Head Start collaboration office as well in this branch, or division, excuse me.
Well, great. Thank you, Rachel. So a lot of great work happening, as you can see, in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can use the chat if you would like. Or we can take a pause and see if anyone has any questions, would like to unmute themselves. Okay, hearing none, we'll turn it over to Tiffany.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Bentley, Emily, and Rachel. I think all 3 of you gave some really great examples of some of the benefits of data governance. And Tony had mentioned earlier that data governance is in operation, whether it's formal or it's informal. And some of the things that we've heard, just even from our 3 speakers just now, is really how that formal data governance can be really strategic, and it has that big picture and long-term view in sight. I thought it was really interesting that all 3 of them talked about how some of their governance processes that are in place right now started back as far as 2007 or 2010, 2011. And so it really is a long-term effort, and it is really strategic effort. And one of the things that differentiates formal data governance from informal is that the formal data governance, it really is, as Bentley said, creating a framework for some of the decision making. And it really, once you've created the structure in this framework, it's really independent of specific people or specific personalities. And so there's a lot more stability. So if people come and go, there is some stability because you have these formal structures in place. And also because it can be agency-wide, or in the cases of some of the projects we just heard about, really even cross-agency. So if you're thinking of a whole program that's a cross-agency program, when you're really looking across that whole breadth, it really it engages all of the relevant stakeholders, and it requires a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, and in doing so, that it really helps break down some of those silos and really even strengthens those communication and collaboration. And one of the things I noticed as folks were, when we asked initially what your thoughts were, what words came to mind with the words of data governance, I did see a lot in terms of processes and documentation and standards. That certainly is part of a formal data governance. And one of the benefits of that is it really helps provide more transparency as well as more consistency in your data. If you're doing processes the same way, you know what those steps are. If those steps are made known to a number of people, you have more transparency there, you have more consistency, and then that fosters more trust in the data. Both Emily and Rachel spoke a little bit about data sharing agreements, and so formal data governance can really help provide some of those safeguards to protect personally identifiable information, particularly when you're sharing data across agencies and throughout different aspects of your program. And then that documentation that we talked about, having those consistent processes, having documented processes, it really does help support sustainability, because that work, and this goes back to one of the questions that data governance can answer, what do I do? Cindy's been working here for 10 years and now she left. Having some of those documented processes in place really can help ensure that that work continues more seamlessly when you do have turnover, because you've been able to capture the knowledge and you've documented that. Informal data governance, on the other hand, can be much more person-dependent. It can also be much more compartmentalized and segmented. So sometimes decisions might be made without getting input from all of the appropriate stakeholders, and it could mean that the decisions might conflict, particularly if you're working across agencies. You may have different decisions in different agencies that may be conflicting, which can add to some confusion, and all of this can lead to some of the data quality issues. I noted that Rachel had mentioned how one of their principles is really around data quality and data integrity. And that's one of the risks of not really having a formal structure in place, is that it can lead to some of those data quality issues. It can lead to some inconsistency in the data. It may be that you have some business rules and processes, but they might be applied differently over time from person to person or from year to year. And the more inconsistency that you're having, then that brings up questions about reliability and validity of your data. So there can be some confusion as well, particularly on some of these broad projects where you are working with different agencies around roles and responsibilities. And some of the, I think I heard Rachel say as well, one of the things that they're trying to do is be more efficient in terms of being able to grant access to the folks who actually need access to the data. So some of that can be hard and cumbersome if there aren't good processes in place. And probably one of the biggest risks of having an informal data governance is around some of that data sharing. If you don't have proper safeguards around that, there's a possibility that some of that data could be shared inappropriately, and if that's personally identifiable data about children, that's something that none of us really want to see happen. So Rachel started to talk a little bit about some of the different principles that they're doing and in Maryland. of things in terms of assessing where you are in terms of your own data governance, the next few slides will have a few different components of data governance, and these can be some things where these can be places where you can look internally to see how are we doing this and where can we improve in some of these areas. So first, do you have some sort of system of data stewardship or data ownership so that each piece of data that's collected or stored or reported, that there is one person who's responsible? In some cases you may have co-stewards, but someone who is the expert on that data element, who knows, understands the context, who's responsible for ensuring the quality of that data element. Is that in place? Are your processes documented to ensure that important steps aren't being left out? Do you have a record of some of the requirements in the business rules that could help even facilitate your data quality review? Have you clearly defined some of your roles and responsibilities? How do folks on your project know who's responsible for specific tasks? Have you run into situations where you maybe have multiple people doing the same task, or some tasks that maybe are falling through the cracks because no one is responsible? These are all components of data governance. How are you managing changes? Do you use versioning of documentation to ensure that everybody's working from the same version? Or how are you tracking changes to the data, or changes to the data definitions or the data elements? Do you have established processes for that, for determining when data may be changed, and how? Do you know by whom it was changed and for what reason? And how do you manage all of that? How do you keep track of that? What kinds of policies around data do you have in place? Do you have policies governing the collection of data or around data requests? Do you have like a process for data requests to come in, a process for determining what data can be shared, what types of redaction may be needed, what types of security may be needed around the sharing of data, policies around access to data, things like that. I noticed in the chat box as we were going through, there's a number of people that talked about standards, and so have you developed standards? And that can be standard processes, which documentation really helps, because then if I leave, whoever comes in my place can do that process in the same way. But it can also be things like naming conventions, so that you have like the data elements are named using a similar convention so that they're, it's easier to understand and to know what those data elements may be. And creating common languages could be everything from documentation templates, so that if you have documentation that it looks similar, it's easy to follow. And then what are some of your communication protocols? How are you keeping various stakeholders? How are you keeping leadership in some of your various agencies that are part of your project? How are you keeping them informed? How do you know who needs to be informed about what aspects of the project? Is there some sort of communication protocol in place? Are you capturing minutes from the meetings and saving them to a shared location? What kinds of safeguards do you have around controlling access to your data? We've talked quite a bit about that. Do you have some clear criteria to determine different levels of access, determine what's an appropriate level of access for a particular use, for a particular staff person, for a particular partner that you may be sharing data with? Do you have processes in place to remove users who are no longer need access or who may have left the agency? Those sorts of things could all fall underneath access control. And then finally, how are you managing your infrastructure? And by infrastructure, meaning some of the hardware, software, keeping all of that up to date, patching servers and all of that sort of thing, and disaster recovery processes. So all of those different things, and data governance can look different from one agency to another, from one program to another, depending on your situation. You may have emphasized one component over another. You may have additional components, but these are some that are fairly common across a lot of different data governance environments. So I want to go now back to our panelists, and there are two questions that have come into the chat box, and I think one of them we're going to get to here, which are what are some of the issues you've seen in implementing data governance, and that we'll kind of get into that into our next one. And then how are states gaining data on tribal populations? I'll put that out there for you, the panelists, and if there is something that you can share during this next sharing piece, you can do that as well. So Bentley in Georgia, I'll start with you first. And the question that we have here are, what were some of the challenges that you've had in implementing data governance, or have you experienced some of these risks associated with informal data governance? And then how have any of these specific components that we just talked about helped in overcoming some of those challenges?
Sure. Thank you. I would say that we've had, a couple of challenges. Well, I would say more than a couple. I mentioned in the earlier question that for us, we try to do a governance structure where no one decision is made by any one stakeholder or data contributor alone, and that's great, but it also means sometimes that we need some help, that there's no one leader of the project, and so it ends up just taking more time for a decision to be made. It also means with some of our other, and even really here at DECAL too, it's not anybody's one job. And so, especially with our other agencies, it's just a portion, or even not a portion, just another project or meeting that's on someone else's calendar. And so we've had a little, challenges with data ownership and, being able to make those decisions. I would also say another challenge has been just a misunderstanding about what the system is, and that it's it's to look at data in the aggregate. It's a research-based system. It's not something to be used for case management. And so we've had to do some education along with that. And then I would say a really pleasant challenge that we are still, figuring out how to manage is a surprise for us has been the way that the data system's been used at the community level. I think for many of us, we envisioned that this would be much more of a state level data system, but we're finding more and more communities are going in and using this for them. And so one of the things that we've done to overcome that challenge is to develop some on-site community trainings and some data visualization and data management work. We've partnered with our Family Connection Partnership, which is in every county in the state, and so we're developing some training at that level. I mean, it's actually been a really pleasant challenge, but I think it goes back to envisioning who exactly your system is used for, and making sure you think broadly with that, and thinking through, not only unintended consequences, but I would say unintended uses. So again, it's been a challenge just to make sure that we can be responsive at the community level, but I would say it's been a really pleasant challenge.
Great. Thank you, Bentley. Emily, so what are some of the challenges that you have faced in Pennsylvania as you've been implementing data governance, or some of the risks?
Sure.
Yeah, that you faced, and yeah, you want to share?
Absolutely. So there are a variety of different things. I'm looking at the slide that was presented around risk. I think the easiest things to sort of say you can take care of, or the biggest risks people think about are things like security, things regarding the role or responsibilities, and sometimes with the data. But a lot of times the risks that we found, and this is because we have a lot of systems that are using the same sorts of data but in different ways, is just making sure that we have a reliability around the definitions of data. So how we created common identifiers for the children in Pennsylvania, for our providers in Pennsylvania. How do those children and those providers obtain that common identifier when other systems that also rely on those common identifiers are tapping into that database as well. And so kind of taking, it's taken a lot of work and collaboration, and it's still difficult at times to determine who's right, who gets to be sort of the owner of an identifier for a child. And so that's definitely something that's taking time. So it's easy when you're developing a system to say, I absolutely know what the definition of a particular data item is, but how is it used? What are the rules around the use of that data and creating those connections? I think Bentley mentioned it as well, and also Rachel and some of the things she was talking about, but it's also the awareness. And so the other thing that comes with informal data governance is about the data sharing. And I'm sure that many of those on the phone probably have a lot of relationships with stakeholders, with advocates, and others who are familiar with your data, familiar with your systems, and familiar with you professionally. And so it's creating that balance between partnership and protocol, and making sure that folks understand I can provide you with data, but I do need to follow a process in order to do that, to make sure that when we're answering the question, it's being answered consistently. It's using the same set of standards for data that's being pulled together out of the system in order to respond to that question. And so, in Pennsylvania, we have made a lot of concerted efforts in communicating within our office, writing things down, and you stressed that a lot in your conversation, but really writing things and protocols down, who's going to do what when a request comes in, and really helping so that those consistencies can happen. Because the greatest consequence to those sorts of issues is really presenting to a stakeholder data that is not communicating the right message, because then we can't be a good partner together when using that data to help us move an initiative or an idea forward.
Great. Thank you very much, and that's some great advice as well. Rachel, how about in Maryland?
Yeah, I think I can echo a lot of what Bentley and Emily already shared. So in the interest of time, I'll just touch on one or two other points. I particularly appreciated Bentley discussing, and Emily picking up on it too, the understanding the real use of a system and how that might vary across different programs in terms of how data are collected and then used by staff or presented in an outward public-facing way. So I think that's really key. That's been certainly a challenge that we're working to address continually. I really appreciated also Emily's comments on really getting common data definitions and understanding the reliability of different data elements across systems. I would add to that sort of another wrinkle that Maryland is working through as part of that challenge is certainly we are moving to what we call lift and shift a lot of our existing systems into a shared platform, a cloud-based platform, but we still have to grapple with long-standing program administrative systems that just really won't budge and will continue to operate much in the way that they have. And in our state, it's really about Head Start data and how that data just sits, in its own system, and we have to think of creative ways to pull at the elements of that data that we need and get them into a shared system platform for all the users who need access to it, including Head Start, to be able to really benefit from the use of that data. I'll just stop there in the interest of time.
Right, super. Thank you very much. we have a couple of questions that have come in. So one of the questions, and I'm just wondering if there are others who are on the line in addition to our panelists, was how are states gaining data on tribal populations? So are there any of you on the line who have some tribal populations and have some experience in terms of how to collect some of that data? You can press *6 and speak. Okay. So I'm not hearing anyone speaking there, so that may be something that we'll have to come back to. Another question came in, and I don't know if any of you on the panelists, but has anyone had to restart a failed data governance program? Or even anyone on the line, any of our participants, if you've had that experience and want to share a little bit about that, you could do *6 to unmute.
Hi, this is Bentley. I'll share a little bit on this. I wouldn't say that we're restarting a failed data governance, but I would say that, like a lot of other states, this year we've started with the new administration, and so that means there's been a lot of turnover at different agencies. And then, to be honest, I changed roles, so there's just been a lot of change. And so we're in the process now, and part of the reason the policy manual has been delayed is because of this turnover. So we are having to kind of go back to square one, and we are having to re-engage different agencies and knowing that we're going to have to bring people up to speed. And that's why I think it's so important to have everything documented and have everything where you can easily send and, do webinars and bring people up to speed. I don't know that I have an answer exactly of how to do that, but I don't think that's an uncommon thing to at least have to, take a couple steps back.
Great. And that's where I think having sort of a roadmap and a plan, it can help to restart something that may have faltered. But having that bigger strategic picture in place then can also help with that as well. At this point, I want to turn it back to Tony. So, Tony?
Thank you, Tiffany. So when it comes to organizational structures in terms of best practice, data governance includes establishing representative governing bodies that are responsible for developing and implementing data policies and processes. Most interagency data governance programs have either 2 or 3 groups, depending on the state size, staff capacity, culture, that is data culture, in terms of wanting to improve on the quality of data and using that data to inform decisions, and also structure. The data governance structure must include at least 2 groups, one at the executive leadership level and at least one at the implementation level. And this ensures that the program has the leadership support that's required for sustainability, sustaining the efforts, and the detailed knowledge required to make informed decisions. So there is a 3-tier structure, and to minimize the coordination burden, the group should start with the simplest structure that includes the appropriate representation. A 3-group structure is composed of an executive board, and this is your policy level folks, a data governance committee that works with the strategy, and also a data steward committee that's at the implementation level. However, there are instances where a 2-group structure is fine, acceptable, and this would be where data stewards are members of the data governance committee, and there's no distinct data steward committee. If the participating agencies have their own data governance programs, then the single agency and interagency data governance programs need to make sure they're communicating on a routine basis to make sure all the work that's in the state is being coordinated. And just real quickly, I won't read through them all, but we did mention data sharing agreements earlier. And here are some elements that can be used that we often see in data sharing agreements, just identifying the specific data elements or variables that will be shared. What is the purpose? What are the questions, the program and policy questions you want to answer? How long will you use the data for? And we've talked about privacy, so having security guidelines in place. Reporting guidelines, which also include not just formatting of reports, but making sure everybody has an opportunity to see the reports so they know what's in those reports and can be ready for any questions that may come their way. And of course, we've already discussed roles and responsibilities throughout this call, and then the retention and destruction policies in terms of how long you'll use the data for, and then after the data has been used and what happens to it. Again, going back to privacy and security. So how can your agency benefit from data governance? Please enter one or two ways that your agency benefits or will benefit from having data governance. And while you're doing that, we do have our final questions for our panelists, and we'll start with Bentley. And what is the structure of data governance for your project, and what successes have you seen with your data governance efforts? And I think we have started touching on that.
Sure, and in the interest of time, I'll go real quick. So basically our governance structure has 3 tiers. We have a top tier that is, includes all the different agency heads, and they're only engaged, if needed, which hasn't been too often. Then we have the executive committee, which are people that can speak on behalf of their agency. And then we have a leadership committee that is composed of people from different programs at different leadership levels, and really just who are the people that are working with the data and most engaged. We will have a research committee that will start this fall that will work on more of the research issues, but as of now the governance is just those 3, primarily the executive and leadership. I would say our biggest successes have been signed data sharing agreements from all partners, including all Head Start grantees. So including Head Start in that governance structure has been really successful. I would say that just the process itself has increased our collaboration and understanding with different agencies. One of the things that has been really successful for us is we've been lucky and fortunate to have TA from different entities, primarily EC Data Work, so we had a grant with them, and that helped us in a lot of different ways, but one thing, it just helped keep the work moving, so we were very fortunate to have that. And then, in just, doing webinars like this and talking to other states and getting together with other states, a lot of that is the result of that TA. That's also been really helpful.
Thank you, Bentley. And Emily?
Hi, and yeah, I think our structure has similar to what Georgia was describing. We also have some governance across program offices for specific elements of data, so that's been helpful to allow folks who are actively using the data and understand it well to work together, and that's been particularly important around data definitions and data use. One of the things that we found to be successful in our data governance efforts was really to start focusing on the way in which we are maintaining consistency in data sharing. And so we've developed a couple different processes and projects around some public dashboards that have been very effective for us in helping us to answer common questions that consistently come up. And so with that, we were able to use our governance structure, our program, folks from our programs that are very knowledgeable about the data, and put together some common questions and information that allow folks to answer some very standard questions, get some standard information, and that's really helped us to develop some consistency in our state.
Thank you, Emily. That's great to hear about the data use. And Rachel?
Sure. So as I mentioned here in Maryland, the data modernization initiative that is supported by our PDG Birth Through 5 grant really has two main prongs. And the first is taking the core components of our existing data system and transferring them into a shared platform on the cloud, which enables shared access and use across several agencies, including the Maryland State Department of Education, our Department of Health, and our Department of Human Services. Our home visiting program in particular is housed under our Department of Health. We have the asset of having almost all of our other early childhood programs that directly serve kids in that age group and their families here under MSDE. So we have, in the past year, moved to have MOUs drafted and are in the process of being approved by those agencies so that we can begin to really enhance our data integration and our storage and our communication capacities across those agencies. And the pieces of our system that are moving over onto this cloud are our child care administrative tracking system, which we call CCATS, and our child care portal, which is more of an internal staff-facing tool where data are entered on kids entering our child care scholarship program. We're excited because we've been coordinating with Pennsylvania to learn a little bit more about the architecture of their Pelican system, which mirrors our CCAT system. And so I believe we're working to learn more about that architecture and see if it can be transferred into our state and used as a more seamless architectural foundation for that system. And then our unique child identifiers are also in the process of being developed, and we're putting into place all of the data cleaning and integrity and reliability protocols and staffing support that we need for that process to begin to take shape in the state. So we're looking both across the various components of our own division of early childhood here as well as to our sister state agencies to really get this work underway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. And I'll turn it over to Tiffany.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Just really quickly, one sort of thing to remember is that data governance is dynamic and that some of the structures and policies that you have in place, they may change and they continue to evolve as your programs and your policies and the data systems around that all evolve. And just one of the important things is really to make sure that you're engaging every of your partners or your representatives, making sure that everybody's there at the table as that evolves. We have a list of data governance resources here, many of which were referred to on some of the earlier slides. And I'm sure you'll get a copy of this slide deck, so you'll have links to some governance resources. Some are early childhood specific, some are more general, but we wanted to provide those as well. And then Jim, I guess I'll pass it over to you just for the very closing. I know there's some questions that came in. We've got about a minute or so left.
Sure. Thank you, Tony and Tiffany, and thank you to Emily, Rachel, and Bentley for your contributions today. It was a great conversation. I know for time reasons, we had a few questions that came in. We will capture those questions and work with our panel today to provide you with some responses to those questions as a follow-up, so we make them available to everybody that was on the call today. And I know that we had one or two people offer some resources, and to those that did, we will be following up with you so that we can capture those resources that you suggested. Let's see. We did want to say thank you to everyone. Next, to remind you that we have our next series in the data webinar, Communities of Conversation, which will be about single ID processes. That will occur on July 30th. That one will begin at 3 o'clock this time. If you've not registered, please register. And if you need the registration information, let us know. We'll be happy to get that to you. We are very curious about your feedback and suggestions for future communities of conversation. You can see the web link to the SurveyMonkey. We will also follow that up in an email, but we would like your feedback. It always helps us to continue to make this a valuable process to all of you on the call. And I see it's 4:31. Again, thank you, Tony and Tiffany, and also thank you to Sammy and Denisha and Evelyn, who have been our Adobe managers behind the scenes. Thank you so much. And everybody have a wonderful weekend. And for those of you in this heat, try and stay cool. Thank you.